Hey, welcome to your weekly Corner Späti. It is me, Kieran. I'm joined by Nick.
Hello.
Rob.
Warm greetings.
And we have special guest with us, Szilárd Pap of Partisan. Say hello, Szilárd.
Hi. Thank you for inviting me.
Naturally enough, since we had Szilárd here, we are going to talk about the results of the French election, since this is Monday, in which this episode is coming out.
And the Slovenian election.
Yeah, we'll also talk about the Slovenian election, sure.
Well, I know a lot about those, especially the Slovenian ones. I mean, our prime minister have bought half of Slovenia already. So
yes, yeah, we did a whole episode on how Janša is effectively like Orban's protege of a sort, but also okay, no, I'm not going to talk about the French election. It's been too much for the last.
Talking about the future of Europe, as we've been saying on this show for years.
Yeah.
Look towards Hungary. And Hungary had an election. Serbia had an election the same day too, which kind of makes sense because, you know, Vučić and Orban definitely had their like campaigning side by side with one another. But we're talking about the big man himself. We're talking about Viktor Orban. We're talking about Fidesz. We're talking about where we sit, what this means for Europe, you know, and all that fine stuff that we've.
I think the only thing I'm going to mention about the Serbian election until we do an episode about that is I'm just going to link in the description the video of Vučić and Orban campaigning on the train while Vučić is like waving to nobody.
Yeah, and Orban has no idea what's going on. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it's really great.
All right. So I guess we're gonna talk to Szilárd about like what's happening in Hungary because the election happened and I guess slightly surprising results from what people were saying a couple of months previous, which is Fidesz, Viktor Orban's party, got like a majority, won something like 53% of the popular vote, something along those lines.
Yeah.
Whereas like polling a couple of months or even weeks prior to that were saying that it was going to be close between Fidesz and this United for Hungary, this united opposition. And that didn't work out. So I think we're just going to go through the effectively three parties that are in parliament now and talk about what they've been doing. So I think we'll start with the incumbent first. And Fidesz, they've been in charge since, how long has it been now?
12 years, since 2010.
Yeah.
You're coming on Mackle years. Wow.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Yeah, there are people, I mean, I have colleagues who actually have lived under Fidesz for at least half of their lives. So
100%, yeah. Yeah, fair enough. But like, what has Fidesz been doing since the last election, since 2018? I guess that's like my first question.
Yeah, so basically we had the elections 4 years ago in April as well, and then like shit got really crazy really fast. By the end of the year, by the end of 2018, there were like huge protests. It was a really, really cold winter, and still there were like huge protests for months because of a law that became infamous in Hungary, but also I think internationally as the slave law.
Yeah.
And so basically this was a law regulating overtime work. And it was kind of a very basic flexibilization, kind of like this pro-capital move that made possible for employers to actually kind of pay overtime fees later and kind of make it more flexible. So it served kind of like German automobile industry in Hungary. It wasn't a secret. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Szilárd, during a trip to Germany actually kind of said it, that they are like very happy about this law.
We did this for you.
Yeah. So basically it was So in Hungary we had this problem for some time, this kind of labor shortage problem. And so, and also kind of the automobile industry has this kind of very fluctuating work orders. So it basically, sometimes they have to work a lot, but sometimes they just don't have any work to do. So this kind of overtime law or slave law actually made it much more easier for employers to profit from, or kind of like profit from labor. And so this was the kind of the first thing they did after the first huge thing they did after their re-election in 2018. There were huge protests. There were kind of like road blockades made by trade unions, and also kind of this kind of parliamentary obstruction. So opposition parties actually occupied the kind of the speaker's pulpit there and all this kind of stuff. And then they actually managed to kind of hijack the whole issue. I mean, this was like a kind of a labor issue, a left-wing issue, all this kind of stuff. And then the opposition parties managed to hijack it into this kind of like liberal stuff about public media and how kind of biased public media is. And then by January, February, they started occupying the public media building. It was pretty surreal in a sense. And then the whole thing blew over. 2019 was pretty quiet in this respect. And then COVID came, and the COVID was another issue where I'm not really an expert on pandemic management, but I think, and most of Hungarians agree with me, that Fidesz did a quite average job in this respect. So it wasn't worse than, I don't know, any other European country. It wasn't better than that. If you look at death numbers, of course, it's higher than, let's say, in Western Europe, but you have to take into account that we have the health status of Hungarians is much worse in this respect. It has been, and also kind of the health system is also in a pretty bad shape. But on average, Fidesz used this usual populist tactic of, doing what people want. So when people wanted closure, or they wanted kind of restrictions, then they gave them restrictions. When they wanted to open up, then they opened up. So there was pretty standard measures there. Even the restrictions weren't that kind of strict. We had half a year in the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, we had half a year of more strict restrictions, but nothing pretty spectacular. But at the same time, they used this whole issue to also attack opposition-led municipalities, because in 2019 we had local elections, and local elections were won by Fidesz, but actually the opposition managed to conquer many, especially larger towns, cities. And so basically we had a breakthrough in this respect. That was kind of the best year for the opposition, partly also because they had this kind of mobilization during the protests against the slave law. So that was a good year for the opposition, the last one and the first one in a long time.
Sure.
And so basically during the pandemic, Fidesz actually cut most of their incomes, their independent incomes that doesn't come via the government. It's kind of like their ability to issue taxes and all this kind of stuff. They even like really small stuff with like parking fees. Parking fees usually are levied by the municipalities, and then Fidesz said that, okay, so the best solution to fight the pandemic is to make parking free. And so they made parking free for almost 2 years, and that was kind of a huge a loss for opposition municipalities. And then after the whole COVID issue, again, this kind of campaign was closed, so everybody started campaigning, and for the first time in 12 years, it wasn't clear what will be the main campaign topic for Fidesz. So they were like experimenting with a lot of stuff. They were experimenting, even before the pandemic, they were starting to experiment with this anti-LGBT, or I don't like this expression, but mostly kind of against sexual minorities. So they were experimenting with that. They were also experimenting with some anti-Roma stuff. But then the pandemic came and it was washed over. So at the beginning of kind of this campaign season, it wasn't really clear what will be the main messaging. They were bringing back this kind of anti-sexual minority stuff, especially, of course, with this kind of right-wing identity politics kind of stuff, Western, against Western corrupting influences, which, by the way, in certain senses, it had some basis. It's a different topic, but in certain senses, they were resonating with some stuff that could also be taken as, it could constitute part of or focus of left-wing critique as well. Anyway, and then there were other issues as well. They started a huge kind of welfare campaign in terms of in their general mode of how they imagine this kind of welfare measures. So basically targeted to mostly middle income or upper middle income people, also targeting people who have kids, so families with at least 2 or 3 kids. So these are their general. But there were a lot of these things, especially tax credits and rebates and all this kind of stuff. And then also by the autumn, with the gas prices rising, this was pre Russian invasion stuff. This was just like a general post-COVID bounce and all these gas price rises. So they introduced a cap on fuel, and at a certain point they introduced also a cap on 6 basic food items. So chicken meat, flour, sugar, so sunflower oil, so some kind of elementary food items. They also introduced the price cap on that. And so this is how we kind of got into the proper campaign mode with these welfare measures, about which the opposition had basically nothing to say.
Yeah.
Apart from some laughter that, like, it's I don't know how much this is culturally specific, but the back part of a chicken is considered as kind of the cheapest part of a chicken.
Sure.
But it's important for broth, for example. But anyway, this is my gastronomic stuff. But anyway, so the back part of a chicken is also kind of a cultural marker. Poor people buy that because it's the cheapest part of the chicken. And then the opposition kind of started making fun of, like, okay, so this is where we are. We have to introduce a price cap on the back part of the chicken, and it's kind of like this kind of I don't know, how do you call it, chef bashing, or this kind of like.
Right. Okay. Like a classist kind of argument.
Yeah, definitely. And this is how we got into the campaign, and then the whole Ukraine issue. I mean, even without the whole Ukraine issue, I think a Fidesz majority was assured because of these bread and butter measures. But with the war, the kind of the quick political instincts of Fidesz just kicked in, and they started framing this whole issue, while the opposition was framing this in this kind of like, East versus West, democracy versus Russian autocracy kind of, and also with pretty much, with this kind of anti-Russian chauvinist kind of rhetoric, and then Fidesz just started to frame this whole issue in terms of like security. We are protecting your security, and also we are protecting your low utilities prices, because back this was one of the founding measures of Orban's regime back in 2012-13. They introduced certain caps on utility prices, and they are still in effect 10 years later. And so the cheap Russian gas kind of argument was also like the opposition would take away your cheap utilities. And so basically they framed in this: we will protect you from war, we will guarantee peace, and also we will protect your livelihood in terms of cheap utility prices. And so that was just like the cherry on the top of the cake kind of thing that kind of pushed them over over the 2/3 qualified majority kind of threshold.
Sure. I mean, it is interesting. I think we'll get into it when we talk with the opposition, but this like trying to make the election about Ukraine-Russia conflict when it seems to be that's like an electoral strategy that isn't working, because like Macron also tried to do that in France, and he was getting destroyed by people who wanted to talk about the cost of living, basically.
Well, Macron did the problem of that he didn't you could focus on the war in that sense and make it like a material thing, and Macron can't view the world in that, where like Orban weirdly can, at least from my like perspective of looking into this. Of that, then the thing that was very odd when then like immediately when the war started, Viktor Orban goes to the border and just starts like accepting refugees in. So like one hand's doing like the humanitarian thing of like, we're going to be, because there are a lot of ethnic Hungarians in Ukraine who immediately came over once Russia invaded. And then also like the very next day, like holds a press conference saying that he's not going to like even bother with the idea then of like, sanctions on Russia, this and that. Because of exactly what you were saying in the regard of that, then Hungary like obviously exists within this like interesting kind of like, I don't know, like post like US led hegemony. Like they're kind of going in their own direction in a sense that then like as we've talked before on the show, how countries like Lithuania want to do their own like path with China. That Hungary has definitely been in that sense of like Orban's probably been one of the closest leaders to Putin of like an elected leader in Europe, of a member of the European Union. When he won, just started calling out Zelensky, which is one of the like most psychotic things, which really just sounded like a dog whistle for Jews at the end of the day. But and then also too, like really has been similarly to countries like Greece is another really weird one where they won't send weapons and stuff like that. Orban's doing weirdly what I obviously it's one part of the piece of the puzzle, but with an election campaign, but it's been a very odd like alternative also too of like what other like nations within Europe or like the West or this like idea like this like kind of like international nationalist movement have been able to look towards and be like, see, we don't have to be like super dogmatic against Russia. We can be principled. We can be like, I don't want to say that like Orban's material in his like idea of like, but like, bread and butter politics, like you were saying, there is this like very odd, weird, like kind of alternative form of politics that he is like the only one who seems to be doing like in an oddly, I don't want to say captivating because it's not good, but it clearly wins him votes every time. And he's like,
yeah, I mean, this entire geopolitical orientation is I mean, it can be explained pretty easily in terms of in economic terms.
Yeah.
If you look at the position of Hungarian economy since the kind of the fall of state socialism, it has been integrated into this kind of lower middle kind of hierarchy in the production chains. It was somehow it was industrialized in a sense, or a lot of capital came in. At the same time, this kind of neoliberal issues or neoliberal restructuring of the economy was taking place in the West. So everybody was taking production capacities to the peripheries where everything was cheaper. Labor was cheaper, and because of the kind of, it wasn't profitable anymore to produce stuff in the West or kind of in the core countries. And at the same time, so this was happening, and that kind of created a kind of a very, very strong reliance on Western economies. But after the 2008 crisis, a lot of things changed, and I think one of the strengths of Orban is to kind of be to pragmatically understand how things are going, what is changing, and his primary goal is staying in power, basically, and somehow for him to stay in power, he needs room for maneuvering, and he is really, really good at actually broadening his room of maneuvering, or how should I put it? So creating space for himself to be able to make decisions independently or autonomously without actually being forced by I don't know, economic considerations, all this stuff. And after the 2008, 2009, there was this opening to actually reduce this like exclusive reliance on Western capital, and to kind of like introduce capital from China, from South Korea, from the Gulf countries, and also from Russia. And so basically this was his move. And I'm wondering what will happen now after this Ukrainian crisis, because in the first days of the war, there was a very visible kind of insecurity in the government, and you could see it in their declarations. They didn't know what is happening. They were surprised. They didn't know where kind of like the public opinion will go, where the international community will go, or like NATO, EU will go. And so basically they had a couple of days when everything was chaotic, but also they have a really good infrastructure. I mean, they have a proper Blairite infrastructure of polling. And so basically they know everything, every little kind of nuance in change of public opinion. And basically they ask the people, what makes you anxious in this situation? What interests you? And in 1 week, they actually managed to create their framework or their main narrative in this issue. And also the opposition helped them. I mean, the opposition prime minister, who kind of fancied himself like, Hungarian Trump, in this sense of like, he wanted to become a Hungarian Trump, not ideologically speaking, although he is a right-wing person, but kind of a moderate conservative, or this kind of like, I don't know, market fundamentalist kind of person. But in terms of rhetoric and, this kind of like how you talk with people, how you kind of this conspiracy-minded rhetoric and all this kind of stuff, he fashioned himself to be this kind of Hungarian Trump. But it didn't work because he didn't have the communication skills. He didn't have the kind of like political sociology that Trump had. And so, yeah, he made mistakes. I mean, at the first kind of beginning, he started at our channel, he started talking about how we have to give everything that NATO wants. And then my boss asked him even weapon or even like entering into an open conflict in Ukraine, and he said, well, yeah, if NATO says so, then we should do that.
Yeah.
And the problem is
Wow,
that
what a pushover.
I have to check with my boss.
so if NATO says so, and yeah, I mean, I'm not. I mean, I'm pretty much. I'm pretty much also a bit too much pro-Ukrainian in this entire conflict. So I'm not a very orthodox leftist, but anyway. So I'm very much pro-Ukrainian, but I don't think that I'm also a Democrat, and I do believe that if the majority of people don't want to enter into this war, even if NATO says so. So it was a huge mistake on his part, and then the government propaganda machine was just like really showing this everywhere. I mean, you couldn't go on YouTube without seeing this clip of if NATO says so. You could see like every 5 minutes on TV, on the internet, Facebook, YouTube, everywhere. They just like carpet bombed the entire country with this clip.
You mentioned the Hungary's role in this world economy and perhaps these shifting international connections. One thing that hangs in the balance is the EU and like these sanctions that there was just this court ruling 2 months ago that the EU could sanction members based on the rule of law, and that could affect, I don't know, tens of billions of euros, right, for Hungary's funding from the EU. And at the same time, there's maybe a conventional wisdom that Europe wants a united front against Russia or something, even if Orban's playing some role that might look bad. Is there any, where do you think that's heading in this whole context?
I really don't know. I mean, what I see is that, definitely, I think this whole conditionality mechanism with the rule of law, it's a bit tricky for Orban right now, especially because he's left alone. Because suddenly Poland has no more rule of law problems. I don't know if you observed that or if you know.
Yeah, that just disappeared. Yeah, of course.
As the Russian tanks entered Ukraine, just like this. The same way as Venezuela is not a problematic country anymore for the US.
Of course. They have. I don't know what they have going on there, but it sounds like it's freedom and democracy now.
Yeah. I mean, Bloomberg. I mean, I read this article on Bloomberg. It was ingenious. That
I just found out Saudi Arabia has democracy problems, guys. I just saw this.
So Venezuela has no problems anymore, and neither does Poland. And so, in a sense, Orban is alone in this fight right now. But the question is how willing the Commission is to actually be the tough guy in this respect. And I usually am very skeptical about the European Commission in general and the toughness of the European Commission in this respect.
Well, that they have any kind of power whatsoever. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm wondering, I think it depends on what will happen in France as well, although this kind of rhetoric or this kind of like belligerent rhetoric of Macron against Orban is just for show. Like usually when real things or like real stakes are present, then they can understand each other very well. And also it depends on what is happening in Germany and German foreign policy. And I really, really don't see what is happening in German foreign policy. And I'm wondering whether German foreign policy makers are seeing what is happening in German foreign policy at the moment.
Well, I think everyone's just like flexing right now. And I mean, the European Commission has passed like their like 7th package of sanctions that are mostly just suggestions. Like a bunch of countries have come forward being like, Germany being one of them, be like, yeah, no, we're not going to actually sanction gas because that would be absolute political suicide, or just like, I mean, Germany would like
Italy as well.
yeah,
a lot of
Italy,
Central Europe.
Also Italy. Yeah.
and it's been. I mean, I think that there's the thing that then I've always at least had the the impression from Orban of is the thing I find is actually quite interesting, especially with Rob mentioning the European Commission thing, is that with Ursula von der Leyen being the head of it, someone who's technically from the same party as Orban is within like the European People's Party.
Not anymore.
Not anymore,
Exactly.
but yeah.
Yes.
At
And
the
that
time
then-
she was elected.
Yeah, so you had like within the EPP last year this thing of like, oh yeah, Orban and Fidesz, they're just too crazy for us. And I do legit like exactly like you said of this thing of like, oh yeah, Poland doesn't have any, rule of law problems anymore, and all these other like, little things that were, debates or like, Venezuela, whatever, this and that. I do legitimately think that it just ends up becoming that then, because Orban is just such a dick to everyone and really does want to make himself out to be the outlier. Like I mean, what is like some of his like best buds are like Salvini, who like wishes he could be Viktor Orban, or like
Salvini
Trump.
was the first person to congratulate Orban.
Trump
There you go,
fucking
yeah.
loves Viktor Orban as well.
Carlson.
Like what? Tucker Carlson. Yeah. Tucker Carlson wishes he could move to Hungary. He did. Wait, no, he
Many
did.
are.
He did. He did like a week-long thing there.
Yeah.
And it's so that's like I just find it so interesting in the sense of how this guy whose politics are like I don't know, they're not even like that, like, I mean, obviously they're not like too like outsider in a sense that then he's still like very like racist, very capitalist, very much fits within like the like pro-Western EU framework of things. He's not even really like that anti-EU because they give him a bunch of fucking money for him to do like anti-abortion ads and stuff like that then he gets in trouble for. He just like doesn't fit within the framework of like the France-Germany led coalition of Europe.
Yeah, but the kind of, I think one huge difference between Orban and these fanboys of his
Is that he's the one doing it. He's real.
yeah, and he's also really, really smart. Like, I mean, from what I've seen from Salvini and all these people, yeah, I mean, in terms of political smartness, I don't really see that much. And so basically with this whole European issue, I can see basically two parts with this rule of law, because Orban needs this money. This is for sure. And then one strategy I think would be for him to actually just show that, or promise that, I'm going to be a good guy from now on. Maybe make a couple of symbolic gestures and promise that he's going to be in a geopolitical sense, he's going to be a good guy. So I'm not going to be fraternizing with, Putin, and I will be a bit more, angry at Chinese government and all this kind of stuff. And then the whole issue gets resolved. I think this is one solution, but this would be very unlike him. And another solution would be just, I don't know what the other solution would be, but the gist of it would be to just find a smart solution where he can get the EU funds and at the same time keep his policy of being, this maverick who is friends with all these weird people. And I think he will try to pull that off.
Yeah. I'm inclined to kind of agree with the first scenario you outlined. Like, I mean, he would get away with it basically. I think for the EU's discussion of rule of law and the concern about things like anti-LGBT laws and stuff like that and the slave law, I think the EU as a whole doesn't necessarily care what happens within Hungary as long as the geopolitics are in line. Like, I think the real concern with Orban is his position, not even necessarily with China, but more so with Russia. That, like, I always kind of viewed Hungary as this kind of like Chinese backdoor for the European Union. If China does become the top dog in the world, we can just pretend we've always been friends with you. Because
yeah. I mean, this is the whole this idea of his geopolitical genius in this sense is kind of enabled by. I mean, it was enabled by Merkel, for example. It's Hungary can do stuff that Germany cannot, but would like to. So it's kind of there were this kind of division of labor in this sense of like, okay, Germany cannot veto this, this kind of totally useless declaration against, I don't know, Chinese internment of the Uyghur minority. So Germany cannot veto it because it would look like really bad. But Hungary can do it, so let's talk with Orban in the background, and he will do it for us, and then the whole thing is just resolved, and Beijing is going to be happy. And there has been a lot of these instances. Yeah.
I mean, like one of the best examples of that was like one of Merkel's last trips that she did was to the Western Balkans, where she like pretty much just like verbatim quotes Orban on migration policies of why the Western Balkans need to be a part of Europe or the EU. They're geographically a part of Europe. Not for like Merkel's like, yeah, like they're not economically important to us. We just need a way so that then, to not create a causeway through Hungary for migration, because her bro, Viktor Orban, was very mad about the quote unquote refugee crisis. And that was like, it was amazing just seeing her. I think the conference was in Slovenia, and just going off about like, yeah, my colleague Viktor Orban's right. It was like, oh yeah, this is the the neoliberal sweetheart Angela Merkel agreeing with that was when far right
had the presidency.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So
I think the next thing I want to move on to though is name alert. Egi Seg Ben Magyar Rosagert. United for Hungary. I pronounced it flawlessly.
Yeah, you did.
So this was supposedly the united opposition that was going to unseat Viktor Orban, and they didn't do that. So
we're sitting here making this episode. Yeah.
So I guess first question is like, who are these people, and like, what were they promising?
Yeah. So basically, this. Egységben Magyarországért, United for Hungary kind of party coalition. It consists of 6 different parties. And out of the 6 different parties, 3 actually have voters and members. So kind of, it's a good ratio. 50% of the member parties actually have some popular support. So basically, we have this kind of like what the Fidesz propaganda called the Rainbow Coalition, because rainbow, that's gay.
Yo, that's gay.
Yeah. So,
they figured it out. The marketing team going.
Yeah, normally a term that's like good in like political theory. Hungary's just gonna be like, yo, that gay shit.
Yeah. So it was kind of like the Rainbow Coalition, and so 6 parties. There is one which is called Democratic Coalition. That's part of the socialist group in the Party of European Socialists in the European Union. So this Democratic Coalition is basically this kind of like, how should I put it? It's a kind of a new Labour style liberal party in this sense. It's led by a former prime minister who used to be the Ferenc Gyurcsány, who used to be prime minister between 2004 and 2009, so for 5 years. he was like a really, really horrible person. I mean, in political terms.
Yeah.
And he's still the most rejected politician in Hungary. So every time you might have seen on Twitter, every election cycle since 2010, he was used by Fidesz on its billboards as a kind of like a deterrent. And every time the current prime ministerial candidates and all these kind of opposition politicians, but the whole message was that there's Gyurcsány and they are all his puppets. And every time, this year as well, before the war broke out in Ukraine, actually the YouTube clips and all this carpet bomb stuff was about this prime ministerial candidate Peter Markizoy being a mini me of Gyurcsány, so being a mini Gyurcsány. This was the campaign clips. So anyway, we have this party. This is the largest opposition party. And then there's the second largest party, Jobbik, which used to be an extreme right-wing party. And at a certain point after the refugee crisis, they realized that they cannot be more extreme right than Fidesz. There's no more space there. And so they started to kind of go towards the center and refashion or rebrand themselves into this kind of like center-right conservative plebeian party, which for a period seemed to be a smart strategy. And in 2018, they actually got the most votes among the opposition parties. Their message was this kind of wage equality on the European Union level. So they were kind of like campaigning for French wage or like Hungarian wages to be on the same level as German or French wages, which is kind of a pretty smart political message, and it actually paid off for them. And so, but after 2018, they kind of like split up, and there were like kind of years of internal turmoil, and then one faction actually managed to kind of consolidate power within the party, and the rest left. Sure. And we will see them later when we talk about another extreme right-wing party. So we have the Democratic Coalition, we have Jobbik, and then we have the remnants of the old Socialist Party. This kind of when state socialism fell, the party, the Hungarian Socialist Workers' Party, refashioned itself or tried to refashion itself into a European Social Democratic Party, and they were kind of the main government party between 1990 and 2010, and the 2008 crisis and also kind of internal stuff that they just fucked up also halved their membership, and since 2010 they've been on a constant decrease. They were trying to, they say, I mean, their name is socialist, but they are not socialist. There were attempts to actually kind of like feel some or introduce some basic left-wing ideology into their party, but it's basically just a political machinery that produces MP seats for progressively less and less people. So yeah, we have them, and then we have two green parties. The politics can be different, and Dialogue for Hungary, and so they are like two really, really small green parties that at a certain point started as one. And it was kind of this in 2010 or after in the early 2010s, there were like these attempts to create a third pole or kind of like an alternative politics in opposition to this big Fidesz versus the socialist kind of duality. And that's how Jobbik arise. They tried it from the extreme right to kind of create a third political pole within this Hungarian dualism. And there was this politics can be different, which tried from this green direction to create the third pole. Neither of those actually succeeded, and by 2022 they actually ended up in the same camp with the old socialists. They tried to actually
I love how the idea of that it's like Hungary going to do like third way politics of like not left, not right, and then it's just like Jobbik comes, it's like, yeah, what about fascism? Like it's like the 1920s.
Further right.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, and I forgot the sixth party. There's also this kind of new wave liberal Macronist type of party, the Momentum. Of course, I forgot that.
What if the FDP, but no one liked them?
Oh, that sounds nice.
No, actually, they are not that horrible. I mean,
okay. That can't be.
They used to be. Nowadays it's. I mean, within the opposition kind of political offer, or they are pretty okay in comparison to all the rest.
Sure. Well, yeah. Speaking of all the rest, I guess.
So this is the six parties, and then it took them actually 10 years to manage to form this coalition. It was the idea of forming an anti-Orban party coalition was there since the beginning, since the new electoral law that was adopted by Orban in 2011. And this new electoral law was basically this kind of first past the post system where it's kind of British stuff. So basically it kind of made them create this coalition in order to have any real chance of winning. And it took them 10 years to do so. And then at a certain point, they decided that they are going to hold primaries for every individual constituency and also for their prime ministerial candidate. And then last autumn, they did this primary, which was a kind of a success, really. I think that was the high point of their campaign. And from there on, since October, they just been on a downslide. Anyway, they held a primary, which first decided on the candidates for for the 106 individual constituencies, and then also they had a 2-round prime ministerial primary, which was won by this guy Peter Markizoy, who is not member of any of these parties and who was campaigning in a sense as this outsider who is going to change this swamp of old opposition parties.
Wow, wonder where he got that from. Come on.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think he used the swamp expression. I'm just exaggerating. But yeah.
The bog of Hungarian politics.
So he was campaigning on that platform, and then he got elected. It was a really surrealistic scene as well, because in the first round he came in third.
Yeah, I remember this.
And then at a certain point he was like strong-arming the mayor of Budapest, who is like this green kind of center-left wishy-washy guy. Like he's really, really a wishy-washy guy. This is how he was also portrayed by Fidesz. At a certain point, Viktor Orban said that when you have to slaughter the pig, this is kind of like a rural tradition of like killing the pig. And this guy he would just get there late when everything is done. And
I hate when that happens.
He couldn't even assemble an IKEA, IKEA furniture.
That's actually good.
Anyway, I think he could actually assemble an IKEA furniture, but nonetheless, politically speaking, he was the big hope of the center left for a long period of time. But after this primary, I think he's pretty much done. And he's really much responsible for actually enabling this Márki-Zay to become the prime ministerial candidate. So there was a second round where there was this Márki-Zay in opposition to the Democratic Coalition, Klára Dobrev, who is the wife of Ferenc Gyurcsányi, and Francis and Claire Underwood kind of parallels here with Ferenc and Klára are pretty much given. And so, basically that's what happened. And this guy was a kind of like a really strong right-wing person. He was saying that, okay, his main goal is to actually attract people who are disenchanted by Fidesz, so kind of like these old Fidesz voters who are not anymore Fidesz voters, which proved to be like a really, 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 really stupid move, because apparently there are no people who got disenchanted from Fidesz. There are people who got disenchanted from the opposition and decided to vote for Fidesz. I mean, Fidesz got more votes this year than 4 years ago, for example. So,
yeah, because like it kind of seems like from the analysis that I've read after the election that people were kind of confused about what this opposition stood for,
exactly.
And that they didn't appeal to anyone bar like some people in Budapest. That seems to be it. They also focused on the wrong issues. Also, we're hearing a lot of like they focused on like Ukraine and Orban's connections to Putin, while you said earlier Fidesz did these bread and butter issues.
Yeah, but even before that, so basically, I don't agree that they don't have voters outside of Budapest. But it's true that, I mean, sociologically speaking, that the more rural areas are more Fidesz, the more people vote for Fidesz in rural areas. That's true. So there is this kind of like tendency, but there are opposition voters in the countryside as well.
Sure.
Just the kind of the ratios are different. But their main platform was anti-corruption, and you definitely, I mean, we know these kind of anti-corruption platforms from all around Eastern Europe, but we know it from
they
Latin
work.
America.
There's never any problems.
Sometimes they actually, I mean, I do agree with you, and I'm a huge, I've been for a decade now, I've been a huge critic of this entire anti-corruption platform. I mean, but also if you look at it, in some cases it works. It worked in Slovakia for Matovic, it worked in Romania for Băsescu, and then so it works. It can give you electoral victories, but it's not. I mean, it's a kind of this anti-political stuff in this context where Orban is actually using politics in a very positive sense, not positive as a value, it's good, but positive in the sense of like affirmative sense. He is using politics to actually make a statement, to propose stuff, to change stuff, to organize stuff, and all these kind of things. And the opposition was using this anti-corruption rhetoric. This was their common denominator, basically the only thing they could agree on, and apparently it did not work. But it didn't work back in 2014, and it didn't work back in 2018. So at a certain point, they should have realized that this anti-corruption rhetoric doesn't work.
They're gonna do it a third time,
but maybe third time's the charm. Yeah.
So before we move on, I have just one quick question because we're talking. There's another party who then is not part of the opposition who did very well last week. or wait, 2 weeks ago now? Yeah,
Yeah.
2 weeks ago. Yeah, and there was, and I want to ask, someone on the ground who's in Hungary. I saw some reports of that there were a bunch of candidates that just like appeared super like last minute, that had no backing really from anyone, that were apparently part of the opposition, but like didn't have pictures, didn't like obviously win, but were just simply like speculated to have been put up by Fidesz in order to just like distract voters. Is that true?
Yes,
Cool.
it is true.
Oh,
So
cool.
basically,
Yeah.
it's not that fun. I mean, it's not that hip anymore. It was much more prevalent in previous election cycles,
Yeah.
especially in 2014. But the whole idea is that the electoral system is created so that it generates it generates these kind of fake parties and fake candidates who can then take up some state funding for their campaign. And because the law was created in a sense that they are not accountable how they spend those monies, you could actually create a lot of these business parties and have millions and millions and hundreds of millions of campaign funds, or like state funds that are allocated for campaign purposes for every party and every candidate. And then they could just disappear with that money. And they did it in 2014, they did it in 2018. There were dozens of these parties and candidates. Like you could see that, for example, in one county, all the candidates came from the same family, and they were,
La Familia.
yeah, and there actually were a couple of people who did this in like big time, in kind of like industrial levels of the siphoning off campaign funds. We actually did at Partisan a 6-part documentary series on these business parties and fake parties, as they are called here, or bullshit parties. That would be the best translation. And yeah, they for a time they served this purpose of kind of confusing voters. For example, this kind of like unitedness of the opposition has been a theme for 12 years, as I said. So there was kind of like always call for the opposition to unite, and their name was like now United for Hungary. But in previous years, there were a lot of different parties who played with this theme of like united opposition and all these kind of things. So they just throw off voters of, yeah.
Oh,
This
wow.
exists.
It's actually weird. Like that does happen in the UK. I think we talked about this before in the podcast.
Oh, the guy who
where-
changed his name to Brexit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he could have Brexit on the actual ballot because he was an independent. Even when like UKIP started, like UK Independence Party, there were councils where people would run for like Great Britain Independence Party, like things to basically trick your grandmother into voting. Like, your grandmother goes to the shop to buy you like the newest Transformers on DVD, and then she comes home with Transmorphers. You're like, this isn't the same.
Yeah, but also it's kind of a more theoretical point, but if we are thinking about the fact, especially but it's not a Hungarian phenomenon, but in Hungary you can see it pretty well, that there are a lot of mainstream taken seriously parties that have no membership, that have no popular support, but due to this kind of like these kind of electoral rules that make it possible to run in a coalition and then have an independent parliamentary group afterwards, and then have funds for that independent parliamentary group. So it's kind of like the borders between bullshit parties and real parties. It's not that kind of tough, kind of really visible. It's more like a question of degrees. And if we want to talk about the porn party, the porn millionaire party,
Yes.
that's exactly on the border. You cannot decide if that's for real or it's just for bullshit. And it's
I think let's talk about that now because we've mentioned it. We can come back to the other at the end. Because like all you're just kind of like describing these kind of like no membership kind of come out of nowhere parties. I was looking into the origin of like Macron's presidential campaign in like 2017. It's very similar.
Yeah,
the lines do blur. But yes, okay. I want to talk about this party that I found, which is not in the parliament, is not important. I don't think.
No, it's not.
Yeah, good. Okay, confirmation. Megoldas Mozgalom, or Solution Movement.
Yes.
Founded by, again, I'm going to butcher this name, Georgi Gatyan. Hungary's third richest man, who founded notorious pop-up ad Live Jasmine, and spun that wealth into being a movie producer and I guess now a party leader.
Yeah, a failed movie producer.
Oh, damn. Pouring one out, King.
He also invented a sport.
Oh, hell yeah. Hang on. There's not enough sports. We need more sports.
Yeah, he invented a kind of, it's like table tennis, but the table is not straight, but it's somehow kind of like wavy, or I don't really understand.
Hell yeah. No, I'd play that.
But there is this
we're going to play this on the next live stream.
These are
and
the
he wants this to make like an Olympic sport.
Yes. Yes.
And actually the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is a huge supporter of this.
And they're a huge supporter of Live Jasmine as well, probably, too.
Oh, yeah. And so
What is
basically,
Live Jasmine anyway? If I Google this, I'm going to be upset, aren't I?
it's the precursor of OnlyFans.
No, because we've had an anecdote, a Nick related anecdote before on this podcast, Deep Lore. It's very similar to Chatterbait.
Oh, hell yeah. I just found live sex cam shows.
Yeah.
Free chat with webcam girls. Wow. Oh, okay, cool.
It's basically how to produce porn with less money than usually porn is produced. So it's kind of like this model of
absolutely, and like
platform economy in terms of porn.
Yeah, I mean, before we run away with the other comparisons, it's worth putting out. There's a great article in lefties.org by Amelia Barna and Noemi Katona who go into like how that industry actually works, because OnlyFans was actually like a bit more liberatory. It actually gave sex workers control over a little bit of what they were doing. Like, we can critique platform economy, but like, as far as I understand, Live Jasmine runs on like this kind of abusive studio system where a lot of the people on it aren't actually independent. They're kind of like contract, like working for a studio that abuses them, and then they're on Live Jasmine.
Doesn't YouPorn function the same way?
Yeah, very similar.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, enough, guys talk about, Live Jasmine.
So basically this guy is like, it's really rich. And at a certain point he was, in the beginning of the 2010s, he was kind of investigated by the Hungarian tax authority for a lot of I don't know, not conforming to the tax code, usual millionaire stuff. And then he took those issues up to the European Court of Justice, and I think he also won there. But so he started fashioning himself as this, oppressed by the Orban regime kind of stuff. Okay, I am oppressed by the regime, the tax authority, and he moved most of his businesses to Luxembourg or Malta or somewhere where.
Smart move, king shit. Business mindset right there.
Cyprus, Liechtenstein, we've got
Ireland.
Ireland, where I'm from, yeah. We've got
I also have to correct myself. YouPorn, I do not think is a site. I meant Pornhub.
Yeah.
Maybe YouPorn is a site, and I'm just very much
YouPorn
unaware
exists
of
and
it.
it's owned by Pornhub.
Oh, thank you for that, Kieran.
They have a monopoly. What can I say? But go on. Sorry.
Yeah, so basically this, but he's also at the same time he's doing business with the government. So the hypothesis of the opposition and most of the independent media was that he's actually running as this kind of disturbance bullshit party to actually divide opposition voters.
Sure.
Apparently there was no need for that, but he did that. And also, so besides being a business genius who invented live jasmine and also inventing a sport
Turf table tennis.
and he also tried to enter into fashion and film industry and all this kind of stuff. None of those actually panned out.
The Hungarian
He's
Kanye?
also this kind of millionaire who thinks that he's really wise and is wise in the spiritual sense. He wants to be a guru as well.
Oh, like Jack Dorsey.
Yeah. It's kind of like his party. One of my colleagues infiltrated his party for a while and wrote articles about the internal environment of how they are recruiting candidates and all this kind of party events. And it's really like this kind of, this sect kind of environment, or this kind of like, I don't know, this Osho kind of vibe. The whole thing had this spiritual vibe as well. But yeah, that's millionaires do that a lot.
Oh, of course, yeah.
I guess the vibes were off because
I'm sorry, Kieran just sent me a picture of, I'm assuming they're playing this weird game in the Russian foreign ministry.
I found.
Yeah. They like it.
I found the sport. It's all in the group
It's
chat.
really fun. Yeah.
There's a lot of other like little vibes about this because like on the show we're a big fan of like rich guy bullshit. So this guy's, first of all, on his Wikipedia page in English, he had a website that was just hisname.com. But now that redirects to solutionmovement.hu. So he's gotten rid of his
such
personal
a fucking
scam. He's all in on this party now. Also, we're pointing out the thing that I think is like very kind of like rich guy. Like he's a big promoter of digitalization as this equalizer in Hungarian society. Like there's just more apps or more things are online, all the problems will be solved. Kind of bullshit.
Does he take all of his pictures like while like tenting his fingers?
There's a lot of very LinkedIn style pictures.
Hell yeah. Okay, cool. I appreciate the swag.
But like one little thing that I feel like is very FTP, very kind of our boy here in Germany, is that when you go on to the party's website, it's in English first, and you have to switch into Hungarian.
Ooh, hell yeah. Mr. Worldwide over here.
Exactly, yeah. Having your Hungarian political party's website even offering an English translation, I feel like, is a very strange.
You know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of my old landlord who ran for mayor of Berlin under a digitalization party in Berlin that is called I can talk about this now because I moved out. Under the name Berlin Brain. First off, yes. Awesome fucking party name. And he has these YouTube videos. He's like a massive like Randian objectivist, absolute psychopath. His name's Alexander Skora. You can fucking find him on YouTube. You can find his Berlin Dome party, whatever the fuck it's called. But he did everything in English except for like he like doesn't speak English well enough. So like he would like say like the date in German. He'd like go to vote on like 26. September 2021. And you're like, wait, what? Like it's just the entire thing was in English. But yeah, has like there is no German version though of like the like LinkedIn finger tent guy. It is a guy that then looks like he rides like a Lasterrad and like lives in like Prenzlauer Berg, but is just an absolute psychotic libertarian. So I get the vibe to a degree of the vibes of that party, because the dude who rented me one of the shittiest apartments I've ever fucking lived in my life is this person, just German.
Does he also have a live Jasmine type site, or is being a landlord?
I bet that he fucking does. I bet that he has like whatever, like the like German equivalent of like OnlyFans. Yeah, nur fans.
And does he do philanthropy?
100% tax break, baby. He tried to buy. Speaking of philanthropy, he tried to buy Air Berlin. Like,
all right, we have to move away from Nick's old land.
I'm finally going to talk about him on the show because I moved out of that place and it's all taken care of. It's just funny.
But so this solution movement, the Memo party, I also saw. Yeah,
they got over 1%.
Yeah,
which is actually a good result.
I mean, does that unlock?
If you get one after one or above 1%, you are entitled to party funds from the state budget.
Hell yeah, my man making more money.
So everyone, this is our prediction for the future. Everyone needs to learn to play this curved volleyball sport because that's bright future ahead for that. We're gonna see.
It wasn't a whole Bloomberg operation of like just burning money, but he burnt a lot of money.
Yeah,
sure.
We're gonna see Sergei Lavrov playing this game in like 3 months.
As the old saying goes, you got to burn money to get state funds.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I think we can move on then to the last party I want to talk about before we leave the nerd shit that is party politics. Mihazank? Okay. Our Homeland Movement, which, yikes, on that name. But this is the new political party to the right. The only thing I heard is they were picking up like former Jobbik voters. But yeah, who are they? What are they promising? Yeah,
they are picking up former Jobbik voters, and they are former Jobbik politicians. So this is a splinter group from Jobbik, which I was talking about earlier, that they had this years-long internal turmoil. And so some of the most radical people who were not pretty happy about this march to the center, they actually left the party and they formed this Our Homeland movement. And basically they took over most of the... So Hungary in the 2000s had a pretty vibrant extreme right-wing subculture with festivals and movements and civic groups and all this kind of, civil, basically a kind of extreme right-wing civil society. In
Sebastian Gorka being a really big fan of them.
And so they actually took over the remnants of that, which was also too radical for Jobbik to keep, and also they took over some of the topics of Jobbik, and you would be surprised that it's not just I think their success is not actually cannot be explained with this kind of anti-Roma or anti-minority sentiments. They have that rhetoric definitely, but it's not very prevalent, especially since after 2010, Fidesz managed to solve this situation through a combination of measures. They actually managed to pacify the countryside where there were pretty big conflicts between parts of the so-called white lower middle classes and the kind of Roma minorities, and there was a pretty big conflict there, and we had like murders, this kind of assassinations of Roma people, Roma kids even. So it was at the end of the 2000s, it was a really horrible period in the Hungarian countryside. And through a combination of measures, Fidesz managed to restore social peace, and so this anti-Roma rhetoric doesn't have that much of a drive anymore, electorally speaking. What this our movement or our homeland movement did, on the one hand, they were the only party who were this kind of COVID skeptic, anti-restriction party. So their success partly is explained by this, and also. And this is also an extreme right-wing tradition and a huge failure of the left, that since the 2000s, the extreme right has been on the forefront of the housing fight. So they've been protecting people from foreclosures, from evictions. Right. They've been very active in this respect, and our homeland movement actually managed to keep this topic in a sense by uncovering kind of a mafia network within the, and I don't know the English expression, who are those people who have the right to evict, actually. So when there's an eviction note, and they have the right to do so. So it's a kind of a legal profession. It's not notary public. It's not lawyers, but it's a different kind of a profession in Hungary. Whose job is to,
in the world, they would just send the police. So
yeah, exactly. Like I know that
in
Berlin,
but the police
in Berlin,
need a permission from somewhere. So
it would be a court order in Germany and the United States. But if maybe like Hungary has like a different
so in Hungary
thing.
we have a different kind of profession for this.
Sure.
That sounds like a horrible profession to have. These people probably suck.
Yeah, they do. They are one of the most hated people, and it's understandable.
Rightfully so.
Anyway, and then Mihazang started uncovering this entire network, which at a certain point, it turned out that they have connections with the government as well. They bribed a state secretary who worked at the Ministry of Justice. And so one of the other kind of secret of their success was this topic, this scandal as well, which they wouldn't have been able to uncover if they weren't embedded in this issue of housing and this kind of the foreclosure of houses bought with forex loans, which was a huge thing in the 2000s, especially the Swiss franc based loans, and thousands and tens of thousands of people actually got screwed by those loans.
Yeah.
That sounds super similar to, and I know that I always bring this discussion to another country of Europe to, compare and contrast, but that sounds really similar to how like Golden Dawn became really popular, because they like after the financial crisis they made their entire point of like, Golden Dawn are out and out Nazis who are illegal now, but they made their entire politic about doing like food drives and like giving, like you had to like show your passport to show that you were Greek, but they would like provide you with basic necessities that then the government wasn't doing, and this and that and that. So, and it's like exactly the sense of that the left, not even just in Hungary or in Greece, but it feels like in the sense that in a lot of countries they've dropped the ball on this.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
That there is this like massive misunderstanding that the most important type of politic is the one that then obviously affects people on their day-to-day lives. Do you have a house? Do you have food? Like gas and stuff like that in France is a really big one. That's like the Yellow Vest movement. Like, can you exist? Can you, feed yourself, feed your family, have a roof over your head, work, this and that and that. And like the tactic is just like the right obviously knows that these are old leftist tactics, and they're just like, yeah, screw it, whatever. Like we'll take that up, whatever, and we're going to go to the people and provide them with material goods or with the means in order for them to provide for themselves, because we know that then if we do that, they'll vote for us.
And this is how they build social embeddedness in a sense. So kind of like and it works not just because I mean, it's really funny to have to spell this out for politicians, but apparently it is something of a novelty for many politicians that, this is how you kind of know what the problem of the people are. It's just like kind of working with them in a sense.
Crazy, I know, right? Wow, I
Working
can't.
among them, and so, and in this sense, it's. I mean, I'm really much opposed to this Mihazag movement and to the Fidesz government as well. It's horrible, and I've been in many respects attacked personally also, but in a sense, it's a much more democratic exercise of politics, or a much more democratic way of doing politics than what the opposition parties do, which are really, really much elitistic, and they have nothing actually to say to anybody. Even the people who vote for them, because the people who vote for them, they have also a lot of issues, but they don't have anything to say to them, even to them. So it's a pretty kind of tragic crisis of representation that is happening in the Hungarian opposition sphere.
Well, that I think that leads us to exiting the parliament and the election itself. And Rob, you had some question about some stuff happening outside the parliament.
What's going on in the streets?
Yeah, I mean, so you've mentioned this. I think you explicitly called it like a liberal labor tension earlier in this episode, and it seems like a recurring. Certainly, if the left has a role in whatever opposition to Orban and Fidesz is, it seems like it would be through organizing workers and through labor. And I'm just wondering if you could talk about that tension a little bit more. I know there have been teacher strikes recently, and I think they will be ongoing, or they're planned for later or in the fall again. And one example that stuck out to me was with the slave law. There were both massive street demonstrations or protests and worker actions. I know at one of the car manufacturing plants, I forget which one. So how do those interplay? Is it like kind of captured by a certain kind of liberal opposition politics? Are worker actions kind of completely independent of electoral politics, or maybe have a right wing or conservative expression when they do take the form of electoral politics? Could you just elaborate on that dynamic a little bit more?
So I think the first thing to mention here is that the trade union movement in Hungary has undergone very similar kind of decomposition as in other parts of the world. It has been after 1989, after the regime change, it has been integrated or connected to parties. So the Socialist Party naturally had the largest chunk of the loyalty of the trade union movement, but the right-wing parties also kind of had their own trade unions. And with this association of electoral politics, and with the kind of this disembeddedness of or progressive disembeddedness of the parties, they also lost their role. And after the regime change, every consecutive Hungarian government was mainly pro-capital government. And so we didn't have pro-labor governments. We had governments that were more open to welfare measures, and there were governments that were less open to welfare measures. But, having welfare measures doesn't mean that you are actually a pro-labor government in the sense of supporting organized labor. You are just, through welfare measures, you are supporting individual consumption, which is, important for many people, and I don't want to pass a judgment on that. But one thing is individual consumption, and the other thing is organized labor. And so organized labor was killed basically, and what was left of them was killed by Orban after 2010, when he introduced a new labor law, which actually made strike basically impossible, especially in the public sector. So in the public sector, it's concretely impossible to strike. What the teachers or part of the teachers did recently was not legal, or it was a wide strike, or it was civic disobedience. Basically, it wasn't a strike; it was civic disobedience. But it just it's a matter of how do you call it. But anyway, so in the public sector, it's impossible to strike, and even in the real economy, so to speak, it's very, very difficult to organize strikes. Okay, so this is one point. A second point is that after 2008, after the crisis, there were important economic changes within Hungary. There was a reindustrialization undergoing under Orban. So what I said previously of attracting foreign capital, not just from Western Europe, but from the Far East and from Gulf countries and Russia as well. So there was an intensive drive of reindustrialization. Orban had this ideology of work-based society, so everybody has to work, and this created a lot of this intensified exploitation on the one hand. So this meant intensified exploitation, and also created a lot of frustrations, a lot of conflicts among workers. So since 2014, actually the labor movement started to revitalize in a sense. There were a lot of strikes especially in multinational companies. We had the biggest strike, I think, was at Audi, but we had important strikes at the Continental, the German one. There were also strikes at South Korean firms, but those are horrible firms for strike, like much worse than the German firms. And so we had a lot of strike action, and usually this was a bottom-up labor mobilization, usually not through the official trade union structures, but kind of through independent trade unions. So, for example, today, one of the strongest and most vibrant trade union is at the Audi factory at Győr, and they make a very express point of not being associated with any of the trade union federations. They organize solidarity actions with other trade unions. They are very supportive of other workers and other organized labor groups, but they don't want to be members of any trade union confederation, and they also want to keep kind of distance from party politics. And so this rebirth of organized labor is also very much, in this sense, very anti-political, right, in the party political sense. And also, so there isn't this recognition that kind of the fight of labor against capital is actually the political fight. So this element is still missing, but there is a kind of a revival in this sense. So this is the second thing, and there's a third thing that, of course, there are attempts by parties to somehow co-opt these movements. Some are successful, some are less successful. For example, we were talking about this Our Homeland movement. So there was the most recent strike action actually happened in the Continental tire factory in southeastern Hungary. And they were looking at a certain point, they were really attacked by the company management. They were threatened pretty badly. It was a very difficult fight for them. And they were looking actually for outside help from whatever politician or whatever part of society. They were looking for support, and actually left-wing or so-called left-wing parties, apart from there are two really authentic leftist politicians within the opposition. I can talk about them. They are really great guys. They actually had a press conference there, but nothing really more. The actual help that was given to these supporters or these strikers came from the Our Homeland movement, whose supporters, this kind of like motorbike rider, kind of leather-wearing Nazis. This is a thing in Hungary. I don't know.
They're all members of Black Label Society. Yes,
probably.
Exactly.
And they actually went there and they helped these strikers keep out the strike breakers who were hired just recently by the firm to continue production based on this kind of contract workers. So the firm started bringing in contract workers to continue production and basically break down the entire strike action. And then these extreme right-wing people
Nazi
were the ones
biker
that helped them. So it's a pretty strange. So there are these pretty strange things. I don't know if I answered your question. It was a pretty long one, but yeah. So this is how the picture looks, I think, in labor terms.
I think that's a very interesting answer. I think it makes. I don't know if it's certainly strange that the Nazi biker gangs are showing up to the teachers' protests, but in a way,
no, it's not teacher. It's tire.
Sorry.
Tire factory workers.
Where are their tires going to come from for their bikes?
That's fucking right, brother. Let me tell you.
Yes. Sorry, I mix up in my head because the teacher strikes, when they've happened in other countries, a lot of people point out that they're interesting exactly because they put the issue of social embeddedness often to the front, right? Because it's not just that the teachers have a bad pay and overworked or bad conditions, but that the work they're doing is for your children. Maybe they often
you've met them at parent-teacher meetings before. You probably know them.
They continue to provide childcare during the strike sometimes, etc. And that, as we were talking before, that if there's some kind of social embeddedness that this far-right party is doing that the other parties aren't doing, this can also come from labor in a sense, right? Or possibly could. And so then it's interesting that striking workers and the far-right party are somehow coming together in some way. I would assume it's around that.
No, I mean, in terms of, for example, the public sector workers are much more political in this political sense, and they are much more connected to the opposition. That is for sure. There are two big trade unions, or a bigger one and a smaller one, but two trade unions in the education sector, and they are much more active in this sense. And there were more support action from the right. It's for this elitist opposition. It's much easier to sympathize with teachers than factory workers. So it's as simple as that. And so there were much more support coming from the opposition for these people. With the problem of education is it's very difficult to build an overall solidarity within society with teachers, because especially how Orban constructed the education system is a zero-sum game between teachers and parents. Because parents have to work a lot, like they have to work their asses off. They have no free time. So for them, the function of school is to keep their children for a couple of hours so they can go to work and they don't have to worry about their children. So this is the main function of the school system in Hungary. And at the point that the teacher says that, okay, today I'm going on a strike, I'm going on a strike, I'm not doing work, I'm not taking care of your children. At that very moment, the parent is going to say, fuck you. I don't care about your problems. I don't care about your wages. I just want you to do your job, which is taking care of my kid while I'm at work. And so there is this problem with teacher solidarity, and a huge chunk of Hungarian society. And this is also, I mean, education is within this Orban regime. Education is really, really not important in terms of as a social subsystem. It's less important than anything else, and really the only function of education right now is to kind of look over the children while the parents are working until they become 16. After 16 they don't have to work, don't have to study anymore, because the compulsory age for compulsory school age was lowered from 18 to 16, and then when they are 16 they can go to the factory, and then the problem is solved. So this is basically the Fidesz worldview in this kind of work-based society. We are living in a work-based society.
Right. And that's a good place for us to end it, because we are approaching time. So, Szilárd, before you go, where can our listeners find you and your work? We can put links in the description, don't worry. So, yeah.
Well, I'm not really active in social media. I tweet sometimes, but kind of every 2 months or so, one tweet. I don't write anymore, so I'm just editing. I'm just an editor at this Partisan video channel. I'm kind of in the background, and so yeah, I can't say anything in this respect.
Fair enough.
I gave up writing along 1 year ago, and I don't write anymore.
Fair enough. Well, if you speak or understand Hungarian, then you should check out the YouTube channel Partisan and appreciate the fine editing work that is done on it. I don't think we have any announcements at the moment. So with that, I think we will see you on the bonus feed on Friday. Ciao, ciao.
Peace.
Bye-bye.
Bye.